morning and welcome to this week's edition of the Tri-Cities Real Estate Update. As always, I'm Lance Kenmore and you can reach me on my cell phone at 727-8977 or visit us on the web at kenmoreteam.com. Once again, I would like to thank John McKay for hosting and everybody at the station for working to make this happen. Mr. John McKay, how you doing?
Cooling off a little bit. It's been a little nicer than the week before.
Well,
90's okay, but I'm about done with the triples.
You're about done with the triples. Yeah, we got a couple of the triples. Well, I'll tell you what, the real estate market's not cooling off at all. In fact,
No.
I barely made it in here today as I flew in. I mean, the phone's ringing off the hook. I mean, it has been nonstop. And I tell you what, we talked about these trends. 3 different buyers that were working this weekend coming from the west side.
Wow.
Relocating? And some are relocating, but some are calling the Tri-Cities their bug out option, meaning they are bugging out of Seattle or Portland and they're coming to Tri-Cities. Now, it's interesting. A lot of them have relatives. 2 of the 3 that we're working with just today and tomorrow are like, hey, my brother's there. I always love it when I visit. I'm going to pick up a condo. And so, I could rent it out if I want to, but likely we're just going to be coming over on long extended weekends, or if we're quarantining, we'd rather quarantine over there. And so, I mean, hey, we're taking them right now.
Societal events are having a ripple effect on the real estate business.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting to see this because early on we talked about this on a very theoretical level, that we thought we would see this and this would happen. But it's really funny when you start to put names and to the faces, and they're here, and they're here from Renton, and they're here from Seattle, and they're here from Portland. And
yeah.
So anyway, we're excited. Lance is open and willing to show you guys those spots. Now, we talked about last week, part of this causing our low inventory, because we already had low inventory before we went into all of this, and now we have an exterior factor and societal force that is causing additional demand. As if we didn't have enough demand in the Tri-Cities, now we have additional demand. So I'm going to start with rolling right into some great options. So my pick 3 this week is actually a pick 5. And that's because we had a builder that we work with, Ambiance Homes, who has put together a very unique product in West Richland.
And this is big, folks, when Lance leads with the picks.
Yes, I'm leading with the picks. And so this is a 5-plex condominium. So brand new condominiums in West Richland, and we're hitting kind of that demographic that we just talked about. You want low maintenance. You want to come into town and be able to have a nice place to stay, but not have to do the work or the maintenance. And so Ambiance Homes, they build just a beautiful product. And so we've got a new condominium complex that is just hitting the market this weekend, right off of 39th and Van Giesen in West Richland. Ooh. Modern design. We've got a couple of them staged. They show really well. Price points starting in the 250s, and then it goes up from there. We've even got one unit that has an attached 2-car garage with it in the condominium. And so it's a great project. We're super excited to bring it to market. And in a time when inventory is struggling, super fun for us to put on 5 new options for buyers this weekend. So if you've thought about a condo, you've been axed out of multiple offers of other houses and you want to look at some new construction, give us a call. This is a fantastic option for that. Now, before we dive into the meat and bones of today's topic, we always like to start off with our crazy celebrity house story.
Yes.
And we've been talking about multiple offers in our market. Here's multiple offers in a California market, but this is the Golden Girls house.
Oh.
So the Golden Girls house, and now I know some people are like, wait, he just said California. I thought that was based in Miami.
Yeah.
Well, the actual house that they shot in the first year was in Brentwood area of Los Angeles. And so then what happened is once the season took off and it gained in popularity, they built an exact replica of that house at Disney's Hollywood Studios. But this was the house that it was based upon. So it hit the market. Get this, this was absolutely blew my mind. Even the listing agent said she was surprised by the fans and the amount of interest that this generated.
Well, yeah.
So the house hit the market and they had 20 offers in 14 days. 20 offers in 14 days and 140 showings. That's a lot, in case you were wondering.
Yeah.
that is a lot. So it ended up spiking a bidding war between 9 people, and the winners, who were actually a local fan, ended up with it at approximately $4 million.
Wow.
So hit the market at $3 million, sells for $4 million. Not a bad deal for the estate
and
that was
commission.
dealing with that. Yeah, and a decent commission. I would take that bidding war, McKay. I would take that for sure. So one of the things we do is each week I kind of take notes about what people are talking about and maybe what people are struggling with as we go along throughout the week. And once I hear that theme come back 2 or 3 times, that usually is how I come up with the show topic for the real estate show for the week. And the recurring theme this week was closing costs. And that was, if you don't do it every day, it's not intuitive. And you might think to yourself, well, what type of closing costs do I have? So the first side to talk about, and really the easier side to talk about, is the seller side of closing costs. And so in the real estate world, a lot of times what ends up happening is a seller calls, and we had 2 or 3 this morning, and they're like, hey, I'm ready to sell my house. Can you come out, take a look at it, give me an analysis of what it's going to sell for? So a great example, we go out, we look at a house, and we say to that seller, and we're like, it's going to be roughly, your house is going to be on the market for, say, $200,000. And so we said, okay, great, no problem. And then they'll ask me, they'll be like, well, what's going to be the charge for selling our house, or the commission per se? And so that agent, it's a negotiated amount between the agent and that seller. And that agent will say, my commission is going to be X. And so let's just to make the math simple, we will say my commission is going to be 5%. And so let's throw out a random number. It could be, like I said, it's a negotiated amount. It could be anywhere in that spectrum that you negotiate with that seller. So to make the math easy, on a $200,000 house, that's a $10,000 commission. And then so the seller will say, well, wow, that's a lot just to pay you. How does that work? Well, most people will say, okay, well, what we're going to do now is to entice buyers to come to your house. I'm going to take half of that commission, 2.5% or $5,000, and I'm going to offer that to the other 800 agents in the Tri-Cities. And so that's how they're going to be enticed to bring a buyer. If they bring a buyer and write an agreeable offer with you, then they will take half of that. So we'll pay half of that out to the other agent. So now you're at 2.5 for the other agent, 2.5 for your own agent. But if you remember, it was a negotiated amount at 5% between the listing agent and that seller. The next portion that comes up that a lot of people are shocked about is real estate excise tax.
Ooh.
And so a lot of not every state, not every county has that, but it's a seller's tax in the state of Washington. A portion of it goes to the county, a portion of it goes to the state. So we're at roughly we'll just say 1.8%. So we could round up to 2% if you're trying to do quick math.
And that's pretty much both counties, Benton, Franklin?
Yep, both counties are going to have it. So we'll just say roughly 2%. And so that is an excise tax, and it doesn't matter what happens. Somebody's going to pay that, because if the seller were to refuse or it didn't get on the closing instructions and get paid, well, then it would be a lien against the house and the buyer would end up paying it. So trust me, it's gonna get paid.
Lien is not a good thing.
And so you've got the excise tax there. And then what is going to happen is the seller is going to have to insure a free and clear title for the new buyer. They're going to say, look, this is a clear title. I'm the rightful owner. You can purchase this property free and clear. So that's where title insurance comes into play. And so the seller is going to have a title insurance charge, and then they're going to have an escrow company. Usually that's done at the same place. Most people do title and escrow. And so they'll have a charge. So like, for instance, I pulled a sheet up on a $218,000 house that we were looking at, roughly $220,000. That title policy would roughly be $320. Let's say if it was a simple one. And then you would have an escrow fee in that situation of roughly another $450 to $500. So when we look at that with the 5% commission, the 2% on the excise tax, and then the other fees, all in, we're at about 8% on that transaction. And so those are seller-based closing costs. So it always comes up in those situations, when you're negotiating and working a deal, to where the seller will say, the seller will get an offer, and that offer might say, hey, I would like to offer the $218,000 for your house. I'm a little short, though, to cover all my buyer's paid closing costs, and so I'll offer you full price at $218,000. But I would like $2,500 towards my closing costs. Now, as a seller, you're sitting there saying, hey, hold your horses there. I got plenty of closing costs myself. Lance just told me about an 8% that I've got to pay myself. I'm really not in the mood to pay any of yours. And so that's when we go into negotiation mode. We look at the offer. We look at what we're netting and where the money's going and how long we've been on the market. So when we come back, because sellers will always ask me, well, I just paid a bunch of closing costs myself. What possibly could be left for the buyer to pay for closing costs? And what are those? So when we come back from the break, we're going to look at the other side of the transaction and say, what are the buyer's closing costs that they're looking at paying?
Right here on News Talk 870.
Welcome back to the Tri-Cities Real Estate Update. Today we've been taking a look at the settlement statement. and talking a little bit about what are closing costs, and even people that know, sometimes when you get in a transaction and you start negotiating, especially if it's multiple transactions, it's easy to lose track of that. And so I had written down some notes this week as we were working on different deals and talking with folks and transactions. And one of the things that before the break, we talked about the seller side of closing costs, and really that's a little bit simpler because it really kind of boils down to your real estate commissions and your excise tax. And there's one or two other little ones that we'll come across in there, but that is really the extent of what goes on the seller side. And so sellers a lot of times will look and they'll say, gosh, I've got a chunk here. I've paid the real estate commissions, I've paid the excise tax. So I know, and before we listed the house, Lance did a great job of, doing what he should. And he brought me a net sheet. We love net sheets in our office where he said, if we sell it for $220 and I pay those fees, this is my bottom line. This is what I'm going to leave the escrow company with my check for. So people have that expectation when they start, and then you list the house, and let's say in this case we list the house at 218 is the number we've been throwing around today, and kind of the settlement statement I brought. And we're on the market, and we get a couple offers, but it's a kind of a entry level first time home buyer price point, and we noticed that the first two offers asked for $2,500 in closing costs. And we kind of hinted towards the break that for when you're a seller, a lot of times they might say, wait a minute, hold on. I just had a net sheet from you last week when you were taking pictures that said I've got my own closing costs to pay. And you do. And so a lot of times people say, well, what is the buyer looking at for closing costs? Well, a lot of times, especially if we're in a first-time home buyer market, a buyer found a house that they love, or they found one of these condos like I was talking about in the pick 3 that they love, and so they come in and they say, gosh, I've been saving, Lance. I know you told me that there were some 3% down loan programs out there, and we've been saving, and so on that $200,000 house, we roughly have that 3% that you talked about. So we've got $7,000 saved up and we're ready to go. And then we'll talk about that and we'll say, well, we could be ready to go, but there might be some other things that we need to talk about. So that would cover your down payment. Now, when we look at, well, what else is there going to be? Well, as a buyer, you're going to go to Homebridge or First Security or some of these other great places in town, and you're going to get a loan. And when you get that loan, there's going to be what's generally called an origination fee.
Yes.
So that lender and the processor is going to have an origination fee. So that's going to be based on a percentage of the loan. So let's say you're putting that, on that example we gave, that $218,000 house, you're putting that $7,000 down. Well, you're going to need a loan for $211,000. And so they said, we'll give you that loan, but when we do, we're going to charge you $2,100 for getting that all figured out for you. And then once you submit everything to me, we're going to need your credit report ran in there. So there's going to be
costs money.
So there's going to be a $60 charge for your credit report in there. And then, by the way, like, we really trust that listing agent Lance that you used, and I know that house was listed at $218,000, but just to be certain, as the bank wanting to be protected, we're going to order an appraisal on the house to make sure it's really worth that $218,000 and that we're protected by giving you the loan. And banks, they generally are not going to just do that appraisal out of the kindness of their heart.
No.
There's going to be a third-party company that they order to do that. So, for instance, I just pulled this up out of a file at the office, and that appraisal on this particular one, you're going to have about a $700 appraisal fee. So, man, we've had that origination fee for $2,000. We've had the processing fee for another $1,000. So now we're up to $3,000. Then we have a $700 appraisal. Now we're at $3,700. And then what the bank also says is the bank says, you know what else we need is just to be sure that we have enough money to pay your taxes. Maybe you're closing in the middle of a tax cycle. They're going to say, we want 7 months of reserves for the taxes so that when they do come due, we know that there's enough in your reserve account to go ahead and pay those taxes. So we'd also like you to deposit an additional $1,200 with us into your reserve account. And so you're sitting there and you're going, well, geez, Lance, I thought I was doing great. I had saved up $7,000 for my down. Now you've basically told me I need another $6,000. And a lot of times this is a discussion that maybe you start early on with your real estate agent, but you really can narrow this down when you go talk with your lender.
Yes.
One of the things we see in the marketplace that happens is buyers will say, well, gosh, I heard, my buddy, Jim, he got into a house and he said the seller paid some of their closing costs. Now, we don't normally when this happens, that might have been 2 years ago, or that might have been 18 months ago. And maybe the market was a little bit different. So what a lot of times we'll see happen is a first-time home buyer like this will write an offer on that house that was listed at $218, and they might write the offer for $218,000, but they might ask for $3,000 in closing costs. Well, I always tell people to make it easy on the seller's side. We just subtract that from the offer price and kind of net that out. So if you got an offer $218, but they wanted $3,000 in closing costs, really you're getting an offer of $215. Yeah. At the end of the settlement statement, there's not going to be a big variance in the difference there. So as the seller has to look at that and say, am I willing to take an additional $3,000 off of that net sheet that Lance showed me? And in some cases, they might be willing to, but in a market where 200 to 250 is a really hot price point, they might not be willing to because they might get 5 offers. And if you get 5 offers, the chances of one of those not having closing costs is pretty good. Now, another thing, and I won't call it a trick, but maybe a manipulation of the numbers that we see happen, is sometimes people will raise the price and ask for those closing costs. So it's listed at $218. We need $3,000 in our closing costs. So you know what? Let's offer the seller $221, but ask for the $3,000 in closing costs. The problem that you can run into is we went back to, remember where that bank didn't trust Lance and his listing price? Yes. The bank is going to look at that and the appraiser might say, hey, the market's not as strong as you think. I know what you're doing here. I think the house is still only worth $218, and then not be willing to do that. So as a seller, and you have those 5 offers, you got that one at $221 asking for $3,000 in closing cost, but you got that one at $218 no closing. There's an argument that could be the stronger offer because your risk at appraisal is less than with the other offer. So just some very, very little differences, but it really has to do with closing costs. And are we talking about buyer's closing costs or are we talking about seller's closing costs? And so you just have to look at what you're dealing with on the seller's side. What does your offer look like if you asked for those closing costs? Or do I really, in this market, need to try to have the savings so I don't have to ask for those closing costs? And I'll tell you, in a hot market with 5 offers on all of those properties in that price range, it's very, very difficult if you're going to need those closing costs. So kind of, and we boil it down to if you have additional savings and the money that you can put down, you're going to be in a way better spot in this market to win some of those offers. If you have any questions questions about the closing costs, I know it's probably hard on the radio or in a video to figure out. I mean, I have the advantage. I'm looking at
and all the facts and figures.
A spreadsheet here that comes down with it. But I tried to just kind of boil it down to the bigger concepts. If you have any questions about how that works or exactly what those costs are, feel free to go to the website, kenmoreteam.com, shoot us a message, give me a call. This is what we do all day is we walk people through these scenarios. We talk to people about that. And I've had a lot of people call me and say, this just doesn't seem right. I don't think I should be paying this. And sometimes those calls go, well, actually, that's perfectly normal. And sometimes those calls are, you know what, you're right. This is the craziest thing I've ever seen. So glad to walk people through that and help out in any way we can. It's a little bit cooler out there. It's a great time to be looking at property.
Absolutely.
Things are moving fast. If you have any questions at all, go to kenmoreteam.com, shoot us a message, and we will be right back here next week.
Right here on News Talk 870.